would I ask you that you allow for proper decorum and that sort of thing. Since many of you are teachers and all of us have been in schools, basically classroom decorum type rules. So, and if you have any questions, there'll be a couple of breaks, and you can talk to, you know, if you're part of the school district, you can talk to the district representatives, NEA representatives. There'll be an opportunity if you want to talk to them. Now, I'm going to be facing this way, so I'm not going to be seeing any of you guys, and they're going to be presenting the evidence. My name is Henry Cox, by the way, and I'm a hearing officer designated by the Kansas Department of Labor. Been doing labor law for a few decades now and that sort of thing. And so I'm really trying to pay attention to what everybody's trying to say in their presentations. And this is a presentation format. It's not a trial format. It's by the election of the parties, so they're going to give a presentation of evidence as opposed to calling witnesses, as you might think in terms of, again, like a court trial or whatever. So that's why you'll see this presentation style. And like I said, you need to save your questions for any breaks or afterwards and that sort of thing. And I talked to a couple members of the media, want you to participate and everything. Just ask that you not get up here and interfere with the hearing and that sort of thing. Okay. We're going to get started, and the school district, the school district is going to be presenting first, and they have about 45 minutes. It's not a strict timeline. And then NEASM, Shawnee Mission, will be going second, and they'll have the same opportunity. Then we'll have an opportunity for them kind of to rebut or ask questions of the other side and that sort of thing. And we'll pretty much be done, unless they decide they want to make any closing statements. That's up to them. All right. Thank you very much.
They just go there. You ready? Okay. Well, good evening. Thank you, Mr. Cox, for agreeing to be serve as our fact finder. This negotiation process has raised questions both from our teachers and the community about the progress our district is making on several important issues. In these introductory comments, I'll provide a brief explanation of the district's plan for the future in order to establish context for the district's positions on issues being negotiated. Later, in the district's presentation, I will provide more detailed information about the district's goals and the plans currently being implemented. Last year, our staff and community developed, and I recommended, and the Board of Education approved, our strategic plan. Our SMSD Community Strategic Plan defines the outcomes and processes needed for doing our work in the years ahead. Our destination is clear. Every student will have a personalized learning plan that prepares them to be college and career ready and have the interpersonal skills that they need for life success. This plan drives our behavior now and in the future. Our clear and ever-present focus on students and their learning has direct implications for how we use our resources. It's critical that staff have the tools and time they need to help every child realize their personal potential. Schools that improve focus on student learning and develop a team mindset, leading to best practices that result in improved outcomes. This work requires a commitment to every child, mastering priority standards that lead to college and career readiness, and graduating with the interpersonal skills that they need for life success. For Shawnee Mission to realize these objectives for every child, we need a data-informed plan. The past decade, school districts in Kansas have been cut to the bone. Those cuts have yet to be fully restored, which is one reason why we still lack sufficient counselors and social workers along with other real needs. Our challenge is to develop a fiscally sustainable, long-range plan for staffing, teacher workload, class size, facilities, and professional development that supports achieving our 3 objectives. We look forward to fact-finding, providing an opportunity to review district finances and processes as we address issues of importance to every staff member and, indeed, our entire community. And now Greg Goheen, our district's counsel, will continue the presentation.
Again, Mr. Cox, we appreciate you taking the time this evening to hear the fact-finding proceedings that are in front of you that have been brought by the parties in connection with the negotiation process. And I want to start off our presentation by walking through that process a little bit, just so there's a clear understanding or a clear demarcation of what issues are in front of the fact finder and what issues are not in front of the fact finder, so that we can have an understanding as to what we're here to do this evening, and also what we're here to expect when we get a fact-finding report from the fact finder. The parties began the negotiation process last spring. As under Kansas statute, the parties are required to notice up issues that they intend to negotiate on as it relates to the negotiated agreement entered into between the Shawnee Mission NEA and the school district. The parties proceeded through that negotiation process in accordance with the statutory proceeding, and we'll talk in a little bit here about what items were noticed up for the negotiation process. And they reached tentative agreement on some of those provisions that were noticed up. Other provisions they were unable to reach agreement on, and the parties have continued in good faith to attempt to try to reach resolution on issues throughout these proceedings, even after impasse was declared, even after the mediation process that was required by statute took place, and even as the fact-finding proceedings themselves have been underway, culminating with the most recent tentative agreement, which we discussed with the fact finder, relating to health insurance, which took place right before the end of the last semester. As we get to the point in this process where we're looking at what is actually in front of the fact finder, we turn to this first slide, and it's also presented in our brief and the materials which you've received. The issues that remain for the fact finder to take a look at that are noticed up and part of the fact finding process are issue 1, compensation, and that means salary primarily. And we're going to talk about here in a little bit how most of the compensation pieces have been resolved, or at least some of the compensation pieces have been resolved. But what remains is a determination as to what is the level of monetary increase that would be to the base salary for the teachers across the salary schedule. That has not been determined, and the parties are in disagreement on what that number should be and how that should be allocated. Planning time is another issue that was identified by the parties as an issue that was not reached to conclusion, and we're going to talk about that as well, and what planning time means, what was actually noticed up by the parties for negotiation, and what provisions are in the contract that relate to planning time. Issues 2 and 4, and I've numbered the issues in accordance to how they were noticed up, just for clarity's sake. Issues 2 and 4 were whether to add new language to the professionally negotiated agreement relating to PLCs, professional learning committees, or BLTs, which are building leadership teams. And those issues were addressed, and some disagreement remains on what should or should not happen with respect to those issues. Issue 3, whether to add new language to the professional negotiation agreement regarding student management. Issue 5, staff meeting scheduling. And issue 6, late resignations. I think it's important to address with the fact finder because there's been a lot of discussion outside of the negotiation process in the community and in the press about what is not part of the negotiation process and what is not in front of the fact finder. Class size is not an issue which is before the fact finder. There's been no discussion, there's been no negotiation, there was no noticing up of the issue of class size, nor is it necessarily a negotiable item. The number of class sections assigned to secondary teachers are moved to what's been referred to publicly as a 5 of 7 teaching schedule, meaning teachers teach 5 classes at the secondary level as opposed to 6. That wasn't noticed up. It's not in front of the fact finder, and it's not part of the process or proceeding that you're here to determine. The Shawnee Mission School District's budget, including maintenance of responsible fund balances, is not an issue that's for the fact finder to decide. The budget process is part of a statutory process that's decided pursuant to a public open meeting that takes place in August, and that budget has been set statutorily. That is a function of the Board of Education by legislation and by authority, and is not something that is part of the negotiation process. Compensation for other pay groups, what other people should get paid. That's not an issue the fact finder gets to decide. That's not an issue that is subject to negotiations with the teachers' union. Student discipline procedures, including the consequences for disciplinary incidents, is also not an issue for the fact finder to decide. It is not an issue for negotiations. It's again statutorily driven with specific statutes that relate to what student discipline is, what the processes are, and what can or can't take place with respect to discipline. Within that framework, I wanted to talk about items that were agreed to during the negotiation process. And we're going to talk compensation and the different components that go into compensation here in a little bit. But step and column movement were agreed to. So what does that mean? And when we talk about step and column movement, we agreed that the union, or all members on the salary schedule would be agreed to advance a step, which will be a vertical movement in the schedule. And they would also get column movement, which would mean that they would get educational placement. So if they have additional educational hours, they'd get to move horizontally across the schedule. Both of those items have cost components to them, and we're going to talk about what those cost components are. So you can't lose sight of the fact these aren't automatic things. They have to be negotiated every year. There has to be money to pay for them, and there has to be money set aside to do that. Health insurance. Health insurance was another issue where the district and the union were able to reach an agreement on. And again, that is a factor that has a cost component to it. Supplementary salary items, and supplemental salary includes things such as pay for coaches, things like that. It also includes additional compensation for designations that certain teachers may have, and we'll talk about specifically what those are. Again, those were things that the district agreed to honor and agreed to accept as part of the proposal. Again, they have costs associated with them. Teachers asked and requested that they not be required to attend night meetings that extend into the evening on certain types of events. Back to school nights, for example, open house items, PTA meetings, and carnivals. They wanted a limitation on how long those events could take place. And as you know, and as the public knows generally, sometimes those events can last well into the evening. And there has to be some supervision. You have to have people who work for the district there present to attend, to meet with parents, to meet with students, to meet with members of the community, to do the types of things the district's required to do. But what the district agreed to is, with the exception of graduation events, which can take as long as it requires to be there, is that for any of those events, no teacher would be required to attend for longer than 3 hours. Now, again, you know that that takes longer than 3 hours in some circumstances, so the district will have to schedule around that to figure out how to have coverage over the course of the events. But again, it's something the union asked for on behalf of its teachers, and it's something the district agreed to provide and put into the contract. Teacher work days are self-directed. There was language or concern about how the teacher work days would be encompassed in the contract, and some questions about language. And so with the exception of professional development days, which we consider blackouts and would be detailed as such, there was agreement reached that self-directed work days would be accepted in part of the contract so that teachers would have flexibility on the manner and location in which these days are completed. Outside and separate apart from the negotiation process, concerns were presented by the union relating to certain things on the calendar. Now, the calendar is not negotiated. It's not part of the contract, and it's not something the district negotiates. But because of those concerns and because of what was raised, the district took specific steps to address all the calendar-related concerns noticed by the NEA and adopted an amended calendar back in July 22nd for this current school year. And that brings up another point that we should keep in mind. What we're negotiating, what we're here at impasse, what we're here on fact-finding for, is the contract for this current school year, the 2019-2020 school year. As you're aware, both parties have made proposals that would include multi-year contracts, but the primary year that we're here to deal with is the 2019-2020 school year, which is at this point more than halfway gone. Compensation is the first issue that we have to deal with as it relates to, and probably the most problematic issue that's led us to impasse in this case. And in terms of the proposals for compensation, it's important to lay out what the different proposals are and what the cost has been, or the projected cost for either proposal would be. NEA's Shawnee Missions contract proposal was for a 3-year contract. The total compensation package, which is salary and benefits, was calculated, or is calculated out to cost the district approximately $14.7 million. The district, in turn, offered a 1-year contract and also offered a 2-year contract as possible proposals. The district's 1-year contract cost the district an additional $3.9 million. The 2-year proposal would have cost $8.3 million. The overall percentage of compensation increase for the NEA's proposal was 12% over 3 years. For the district, it's 3 years over, or 3.22 over 1 year, 6.87 over 2 years. So significant raises are offered by the district under its proposal. The raises the district can afford to do under the money that's available to the district. And as presented, they are competitive raises and increases in salary in connection with other districts and teaching assignments in the state. When we talk about compensation, it's very important to make sure that we're talking about total compensation and looking at all the pieces or components that come into play. And when we talked earlier about what items had been agreed to by the parties, this is a breakdown, or this slide is intended to show the hearing officer or the fact finder a breakdown of what costs are associated with the different things that have been agreed to. So when we talk about step movement, that's just moving every teacher in the district one step on a vertical schedule. That is a cost to the district of $1.6 million in the current fiscal year. Column movement, that's movement for the educational attainment. A teacher gets a master's degree, a teacher gets additional college hours that assist them with their ability to perform and be an effective teacher, $500,000. The additional health insurance contribution from the district, that cost was $545,000. Reimbursements for college credit to qualified teachers was another item that was agreed to. The cost ranges between 17 and 20, depending upon which teachers are eligible. The stipend for advanced placement and international baccalaureate teachers was increased, with the costs ranging between $10,000 and $15,000. Increases in supplemental pay for high school counseling department coordinators, another $4,000, and increases to the base for supplemental pay, about $32,000. So even before you get to the point where we're discussing increases to the base salary of whatever percentage or whatever dollar amount you want to look at, the district has spent $2.7 million just to accomplish the things that have been agreed to in the proposal already. I just threw this slide up there just so that we could all be clear in terms of what we mean by step movement, column movement, and what the schedule looks like. And so when you look at the salary schedule, and this is just a copy of the current schedule from the current agreement, when we talk about step movement, you can see the column to the far, well, it's my left as I look at it. It could be your, I assume it's your left as you look at it too. The step movement column on the far side shows a series of steps. And when we talk about a step, that's advancing a teacher who is currently on step 1 to step 4, or a teacher who's currently on step 4 to step 5. The same thing would hold in place for column movement. When we talk about column movement, that's moving somebody across the schedule horizontally. So somebody with a bachelor's degree, if they got 10 hours of credit, would move across the schedule horizontally to the next column and on down until the point they reach the doctorate. A couple things we want to talk about in terms of facts that are not really in any real dispute and can all be verified independently. These are compensation numbers, compensation pieces of information that are available and have been presented to the hearing officer by both sides in different exhibits and information that's provided. When using the Kansas Department of Education data, which all school districts in the state have to report to the state, they have to report it in a uniform manner. It is the best and perhaps the only way to verify when you're making comparisons that you're comparing apples to apples rather than apples to oranges, and when you're looking at salary and compensation, and includes all components of compensation. So it's not just looking at just the single piece of, well, what's your base salary if you're in Schedule or step one on the schedule of everybody's salary schedule. It looks at all pieces or components of compensation. Shawnee Mission School District has the highest average teacher compensation for the state of Kansas. Shawnee Mission has a competitive starting teacher salary. It's not the highest in the state, but it is certainly within the Johnson County area, the competitive market area for the school district. Even if you look at the highest starting salary schedule, Shawnee Mission is only about $400 less in terms of what that starting schedule is. And it's important to understand that the way the Shawnee Mission schedule is set up, that the teachers will make that up over the course of their career, in fact, do so quite rapidly. So teachers over the long haul at Shawnee Mission will make more money over their career than teachers in other school districts by virtue of how the salary schedule has been negotiated by the parties over time and how it's set up. Under the structure of the Shawnee Mission negotiated salary schedule, a career Shawnee Mission teacher will have a higher career earnings than teachers in all other school districts in Kansas. The district's two-year proposal allocates, and this is a significant piece, the two-year proposal allocates 72.6% of all new money received from the state over a two-year period for teacher compensation. And that's not counting new teacher positions that could be added. That's just money that's being added to the schedule and other components of compensation over that two-year period. And we're going to talk a little bit about what new money is being received from the state. But it's important to recognize that the district's budget and the monies received don't receive the same increases in terms of money or compensation each year. In fact, we've come through a difficult period in the state of Kansas when it relates to school finance, where monies were even frozen in the block grant stage for a period of time. We even had some regression in terms of what monies were available and being provided to school districts. And while there were additional monies being provided in this year and next year, you'll see that the amounts of dollars being provided, while they are higher this year, will be less next year, less the year after that, and less the year after that. School district historically awards the same base pay increases to all pay groups. So when we award salary increases to the members of the teaching staff, we also award the same salary increases by percentage allocation to classified staff, school psychologists, parents as teachers, and administrators. It's important. Our teachers are very, very important to the educational process. They're probably the most important component in terms of a kid's education. But I think we can all agree that other individuals provide important aspects or play important roles in getting the classrooms ready, maintaining facilities, providing paraprofessional services, providing psychology services and administrative services for the district. And it's only fair that those compensation pieces be awarded at the same rate or same level. But as an overall percentage of the new money, the teachers' new money outweighs these other groups by a large sum, a large percentage. Finally, the Shawnee Mission, the NEA's proposal would require the district to continue to deficit spend the operating fund, while the district's proposal, both proposals, at least avoid deficit spending in the first year of the proposal. As you're aware, over the course of a two-year proposal the district's provided, it would continue deficit spending. We're going to talk about deficit spending in a minute and why that's significant and why it's important to not do that from a budgetary standpoint and from a sound fiscal policy standpoint. But it's important to recognize that in the past 3 years, when other districts were either freezing salaries or not giving increases, this district deficit spent to make sure the teachers continued to get additional monies. And other districts didn't spend that money in that way and didn't deficit spend in the same fashion. And so it is important as the district moves forward to reset the equation in terms of having sound fiscal accounts and sound fiscal policy to make sure that they can pay the debts that they have, to make sure they can maintain the facilities they have, and make sure the fund balances are appropriate so they can maintain ratings for financing and other things that are necessary to operate the school district. So what is deficit spending? And we spent a little bit of time talking to you about this when we were doing our presentation of some of the facts. And why is it so important for the district to avoid the responsibility of deficit spending? In the simplest terms, or the best terms that can be described, deficit spending is simply operating expenditures that have exceeded operating revenues in any given fiscal year. Kansas school districts operate on a cash basis law. just like any other municipality or government. They have to balance their books every year. They have to show that monies are being spent, and they have to show revenues that are coming in. And so when the district gets new revenue streams or loses revenue streams, that can result in operating expenses exceeding or decreasing the available fund balances because they're spending either more or less money than they're receiving in that particular given year. Deficit spending reduces operating fund balances, which is very problematic given the cash flow issues. Balances fluctuate over the course of the school year. The school district doesn't, even if the school year approves a budget, that doesn't mean they have that cash on hand at the start of the school year to fund all of the items that are necessary to be paid for. They have to maintain fund balances in order to be able to pay those bills, which come over the course of the year. They have to be able to have contingencies in case something happens. And they have to be able to pay their bills every month. And in order to do that, you have to maintain fund balances and not deficit spend. As the fund balances decrease, the ability to cover 1 month's expenditures becomes more difficult, especially as total operating expenditures increase. As we'll show you, the district's funds on hand are roughly close to that 1 month period. Finance associations and other state organizations have recognized that 10% operating fund cash balances is a bottom line, while recommending that higher operating fund balances be maintained if you have high economic risk. So what is important and significant about that is that's really the recommended level. That's where the district should be in terms of maintaining its operating expenditure fund balances. But the bottom line is the district right now has been and is operating with a fund balance with a target of around 8.3%, which is approximately 1 month's expenditures. So it's below what's recommended. It's where the district is trying to maintain, but it is an amount that continues to decrease every time we deficit spend. And you'll see a chart here in a little bit that will explain that over the past several years, as we've deficit spent, that available money has been reduced each year and will continue to decrease every year that we deficit spend. I threw this slide up here because it's the current Moody's rating service for the Shawnee Mission School District. I guess technically it's 2016, but it's the one that you can get when you pull it up on the chart. And what's important when you look at this, because Moody's is one of the credit associations, and it impacts the ability of the school district to go out and get bond funding and to do other things in terms of what that financing looks like if they have to do bonded type expenditures. One of the things that's listed or identified in the Moody's evaluation of the Shawnee Mission School District is they have a large tax base with residential employment access throughout the Kansas City metro area, and also that they have a stable financial operations with solid reserves within the parameters of the state education funding structure. And that's what we were talking about, having reserves that situate themselves right in that range of about 10%. We're at 8.3% right now. But when you look at factors that could lead to a downgrade of that rating, when you start looking at that component of it, what is it that could cause that rating to go down? What is it that could cause financial instability for the school district? The first factor listed is a material decline in reserves. And again, every year the school district's deficit spends, those reserves go down, and the ability of the district to fund or count on its expenditures goes down as well, implicating the district's ability to get bond funding and have appropriate ratings for any kind of credit or other issues. A trend of declining taxable values is also another factor that could lead to a downgrade, particularly when it's coupled with an increase in the debt burden. So next we're going to talk a little bit about historical and projected fund balances to kind of give you an oversight of what we're talking about and what does that look like on paper, right? So when you look at this chart, and there's a bunch of different things, when you see expenditures for each of the school years that are identified there, and those are school years as you go across the top. You have the actuals up to 2018-19, and then you have the budget for the 2019-20 school year, because obviously we haven't completed the school year and don't have the actual expenditures, but these are the budgeted expenditures. And you can see how each year the budgeted expenditures have gone up over the course of the last 5 years, as well as what's projected for this current school year. The budget that was adopted by the school district had a budget of $241 million. And that did not include any increase to the salary proposal of the teachers. Those monies weren't budgeted because the contract negotiations had not been concluded. but it shows you that if you include the district's proposal, the salary proposal, that budget goes up to $245 million. Surplus or deficit shows you what we're talking about in terms of how that spend is come up. So when you see numbers in red, as you have for the last 3 school years, those numbers show that the district is deficit spent. They've spent more money than they're bringing in those school years. So in 2016-17, the district spent $400,000 more. In 2017-18, they spent $1.2 million more. In 2018-19, they spent $1.1 million more. And each year they did that primarily so that they could fund additional monies for the teachers. The budget proposal that the district came up with, and we'll talk about what those numbers are in terms of the deficit spend or the surplus spend for the district this year. You can see we had tried to project a 704. That number, as you'll see in a later slide, is already down to 300,000 based upon expenditures that have taken place and expenses that have taken place. So when you look at those types of things and you start looking at what the balances as terms of the percentage of the expenditures are, you can see that as back in 2015-16, we were hovering around the 10%, and now we're hovering around a 7.9% in terms of what that looks like. And you can see how the operating balances have declined in each of those years as well. So how much additional revenue is actually anticipated for 2019 and 20 and beyond? And this becomes very important because when you're adding money to a salary schedule, it's not a one-time expenditure. It's not like you write a check and then that expenditure is taken care of and you never have to deal with it again. If you give an increase to the salary schedule, that's a permanent increase that has to be funded each year thereafter. And so you have to look at what your projected income is going to be or what your projected increases are going to be over the next several years when you're trying to project out what is a prudent way to approach what the salary proposal needs to be. So if you look at this, and you can see where we started in 2015-16 and went up all the way through 2022, and these are what the projected increases in terms of what additional monies the school district is supposed to be receiving. So this current school year, 2019-20, and this projection showed a $9.6 million increase over the prior year's budgeting numbers. The anticipated increase for next year, which is about a 4.07% increase. For next year, that drops down to only a 1.2% increase. So the only additional money the district's anticipating getting next year is about $2.9 million. That goes back up a little bit in 2021-22 to 5.6 or 2.3%, and then also a little bit of an increase as you go into 22-23, all of which is contingent upon the state approving financing to fund those numbers. That's all of it's contingent. So we're totally dependent in terms of what these numbers look like as to what the legislature ultimately decides to do in their budgeting and in their allocation of funding to the school districts. So when you're looking at what a proposal over a period of time looks like, you've got to take a look at what those expenses are going to be over that time period and how that's going to change or fluctuate or put you in a position where you maybe can't give raises 3 years down the road because you're stuck because of what the salary schedule looks like and you maybe are stuck with cost of living adjustments. So when we looked at the additional revenue that was coming in, that's that 9.6 number that we talked about, and that was shown on the May 2019 budget presentation. These are some of the things that some of that additional revenue went to. Classified staff compensation was increased. That cost approximately $960,000. The items that we've already talked about in terms of what teacher compensation would be, the 500 for column movement, the compensation for additional health insurance with the match, and that's all employees, not just teachers, I believe. Buses, we had to pay an additional $346,000 for buses. We had to pay an additional $1.2 million in additional electricity costs. We had resource expenditures for supplies and services of approximately $1.4 million. We increased the number of staff, essentially approximately 28 full-time equivalent positions at a cost of $1.6 million. All numbers that come out of that additional increase of money that was available from the state this year, all money that was needed. The additional staff included new special education staff positions. It included social workers, and it included shifting some of the Title IX or Title I employees into operational funds due to a loss of Title I funding. Title I funding being a different source of revenue that's no longer available in that amount to the district. How much money is available? So this is really where we kind of get to the point of the presentation and the point of the issue. As of August 2019, there was approximately $4.6 million or $4.6 million that remained unallocated. That was money that was specifically set aside when they were doing the budget process that hadn't been allocated to any particular expenditure item, that had come out of that additional increase that was available to pay increases for multiple pay groups. And under the district's proposal, the way we got there was to get the one-year contract with the percentage increase that we talked about, representing a total compensation package of approximately $3.9 million. And add to that the additional cost of items proposed by NEA Shawnee Mission, which included the college reimbursement credit, the AP, IB stipend, and increases to supplemental pay. Including that, the amount of contribution for non-teacher health insurance, compensation increases for school psychologists, parents, teachers, and administrators. Once you take all those compensation pieces out, the only amount that remains is $340,000, a little bit less. And that number goes down if you have contingencies that arise up. So for example, if you have inclement weather expenditures, that's where that's coming. If you have increased or unanticipated substitute teacher costs, that's where that's coming from. If you have any kind of additional expenditure as this happens, that's your flexibility that you lose as you move forward with this process, unless you're going to go into some sort of deficit spending. So how does the district's proposal impact its current fund balances? So the way to look at this, again, the district had two proposals, so we've outlined how both proposals impact the issue. In the one-year proposal, it would give a 1% to the base, and the two-year proposal would give a 1.25 to the base in the second year. And you can see how the district's ending balances would be affected. So in year one, there would be if you look at the surplus deficit line, we would spend a little bit less than what we bring in new revenue or new monies. But when you look at year two, if we do the two-year proposal, which the district was trying to do to honor a two-year commitment to the teachers and guarantee that amount of the percentage of the new monies, it ends up with the district deficit spending in year two of another $1.2 million. So we look at Shawnee Mission NEA's proposal and how it impacts the fund balances. So Shawnee Mission's proposal is for a 2% in the current school year, 1.5 in the second year in 2021, and 1.5 in 21-22. And you can see that 2% would require the district to deficit spend in this current year that's already halfway underway, $1.2 million. We'd have to deficit spend in year two, $3.4 million. Year three, $3.7 million. And that would take our ending balance contingencies down in each of those years, going from $17 million to $14 million to $10 million. Now we'll talk a little bit later about this proposal or discussion that has come up in the course of this process about moving the secondary teachers to only have them teach 5 classes as opposed to the current 6, and what the impact on the budget would be there. But if you look at that proposal, which we anticipate that would be a cost of about $5 million, and add that on top of the proposal to increase teacher salaries at the percentages that the union has proposed, that means the district would deficit spend 1.2 this year, 6.4 next year, 8.8 the year after that. And the only reason it's 1.2 this year is because obviously that can't be instituted in the middle of the school year. That takes the district's contingency balance down to $2 million, which is essentially no money on an operating budget the size of the school districts. So in 3 years, you would deplete the entire reserve for the district, and you'd have no ability to move forward at that point. So the next topic I want to talk about, which was noticed up, is increased plan time. And this is what is noticed up and what was included in the indication of an impasse when it was submitted to the fact finder, to the state rather. And I want to first talk about, and we can go back and you've got the exhibit. As you recall, when I opened up my discussion, the parties, as part of the statutory process every year, have to identify by a certain date what issues they're going to negotiate on in a given year. What issues in the contract do I want to bring up? What do I want to talk about when we're sitting at the table? What do I want to negotiate on? One of the items noticed up by the union was plan time, and that's what's been proffered on as an issue that we're at impasse on. And when you pull up the notice that the union provided, this is what was in the notice as it related to plan time. Hours and amounts of work, adjust the current conference schedule, define the length of night meetings, modify the current plan time language to ensure all teachers have plan time every day, modify the current contract language regarding teacher work days, define the purpose and length of PLC meetings, adjust the date of the second semester PD Flex Day. Now, some of these items were addressed, and we've talked about them already. For example, the current adjust the current conference schedule was adjusted when the parties, or when the district agreed to modify the calendar. When we talked earlier about one of the things we'd reached tentative agreement on was defining the length of night meetings, or at least defining the amount of time teachers were required to be there. The modifying the contract language regarding work days, that gets into that along with the adjust the date of the second semester flex day. Those were things we talked about. The purpose and length of PLC meetings is an issue that we're going to talk about here in a little bit further down. So the only issue that's noticed up in this context, and the only reference you'll see to plan time anywhere in the notice of issues that was noticed up by the teachers union in this case, is modifying the current plan time language to ensure that all teachers have plan time every day. That's it. That's the only thing that was noticed up. So let's take a look at the current contract language relating to plan time that's currently in the bargaining agreement. The current PNA language regarding plan time says plan time, and it says professional employees assigned full-time to a secondary school, 7 through 12, will have at least one period each day for the purpose of planning, preparation, and evaluation of instructional activities. The current agreement guarantees teachers one plan time per day, which was what was noticed up. Modify the language of the contract to ensure all teachers have plan time every day. Now, what that has morphed into is this notion that somehow the parties are negotiating or have been negotiating over classroom hours or actual classes that are assigned to teachers in the secondary level. And I'm going to have Dr. Fulton come up here in a minute and talk about this and talk about the district's process, but I think it's important to understand what we're talking about here. What we're talking about, or what the union has been talking about, and you've seen in the papers if you've read that or publicly been discussed, is whether or not teachers at the secondary level should be allowed or having the contract language that limits the number of classes they teach on any given day to 5 as opposed to the current 6. There's no language whatsoever in the agreement right now that covers how many classes a particular teacher teaches on a particular day. It's not in the agreement. So the issue of collaboration and planning time for teachers, we believe, and the district has taken this position from day one through the strategic plan. The strategic plan is taking a look at what is appropriate or what is not appropriate in terms of class scheduling, things relating to what is appropriate. And the district's been committed as part of the community developed strategic plan to study the threshold issue of how to achieve increased planning and collaboration time. All the associated variables, including the future student enrollment, building capacity, additional staffing, those are all necessary things that have to be planned out, looked at, and determined before you can ever get to the point of deciding in an arbitrary fashion what you're going to do. Because if you don't do that, if your teachers at those levels are just abruptly assigned to only teach 5 classes, then what do you do with the kids in the other class? Well, you got to hire more teachers, or you have to do some other planning component to cover that. Because if you don't do that, then you've got no coverage during that time period. And that's got an increased financial cost to it. If you got to have additional classrooms for those kids to be in during that time period, then you got to look at the financial sustain and look at the issue as to what that's going to cost. And it's important to recognize that when you look at this piece of the puzzle, that what you're really talking about is trying to figure out whether this is something you can sustain and maintain over the long haul, rather than something you put in place and then you cannot financially afford or have not put into place in a fashion that it's going to be sustainable over the long haul and be in the best interest of the kids in the community. We have it down as estimated costs for the teacher's proposal to move from the 6 to 5 down, both $3 million at the high school level annually and $2 million at the middle school annually. And we expect those are minimal costs to that proposal. So with that in mind, I'm going to turn it back over to Dr. Fulton to give a bit of a presentation on the strategic plan and what that looks like.
The issue of plan time's important to our community and certainly to our teachers. Strategic Plan Step 3.22 specifically addresses the need for increased planning and collaboration time at the secondary and elementary levels, protected time for professional learning communities, and having a policy in place to ensure the structures of PLCs is consistent across all levels. There is a study group composed of staff members who are looking at research and best practices related to these issues. My understanding is the group anticipates completing their study sometime in March. Once that study is complete, we can develop a fiscally sustainable plan. That plan will need to factor in the impact of current and future revenue streams, the increased initial and ongoing cost of additional staff, and the ability to provide raises, even in those years where new monies are based on the Consumer Price Index. To that point, starting in 23-24, new state revenue to school districts will be tied to the CPI. The past 5 years, CPI has averaged 1.3%. For Shawnee Mission, that 1.3% translates into approximately $2.8 million in new revenue to cover increased costs for things like salary and benefits for all pay groups, utilities, and transportation. As a reminder, step and column movement for teachers alone costs $2.1 million, and that is based on current staffing levels. This does not factor in any increase to the base or the cost of additional staff needed to reduce workload. So you can see the challenge ahead. We know our projected future revenue, although it is dependent on the state staying true to their commitment. We also know that CPI varies from year to year. However, at least we have an idea of future revenue allows us to engage in thoughtful planning. What we don't want is a situation where we reduce teacher workload only to be in a position where either A, we cannot provide raises, or B, repeat what happened in the past where we use the cost savings of moving teachers from teaching 5 sections to teaching 6 sections in order to help pay for raises. It is critical that the plan sustains for the long term to the extent we control the variables that make that happen. In developing a plan, there are a number of puzzle pieces that need to be connected. We're in the process of conducting an enrollment projection study to understand what our staffing needs are over the next 5+ years. That information, when combined with building capacity study, will inform what happens with physical space as we evaluate lowering class size, which will require more staff. Adding staff and creating more space comes with a fiscal note. Taking time to understand the big picture through careful study allows us opportunity to plan in a fiscally responsible and sustainable way. Through that process, we can better prioritize how we spend money from our various funds to support the strategic plan and give our staff what they need to help students in their learning. The district demonstrated a commitment to prioritizing classroom needs when $680,000 was cut from upper administration so we could maintain teachers and social workers. We'll continue to evaluate programs and services for future cost savings to try to keep that money in the classroom and align with our strategic plan. There's a number of questions that have to be addressed as part of the study and planning phase before we act. Some of these examples are on the slide before you, and for sake of saving time, I won't read through each of them. But they reflect important questions that need to be asked and answered, along with many others, to make sure that we have a good, sustainable plan. Actions taken by the district are highlighted in this slide. A presentation will be made to the board in June of 2020 with recommendations and a timeline for addressing planning and collaboration time, class size, and a future bond issue. They're all interrelated. In closing, I would like to share a frequently posed question and comment that I hear, and that is this: why not commit to 5 of 7 now? Just do it. The response, as illustrated by our presentation, is that we need to define what it looks like and how we sustainably fund it. The solution created will inevitably involve giving up current priorities and shifting existing money to new purposes. Doing so has long-term implications and is something we are prepared to address as part of a thoughtful planning process. Working in this way takes a little longer, but it avoids the very real risk of unintended long-term financial consequences. Acting without a plan in ways that potentially leads to abandoning good long-term solutions that positively impact a teacher's ability to improve student learning is a misstep we want to avoid. Good planning with a solid financial foundation can put us down the right path. And I'll now turn it back to Mr. Goheen.
The last point that I'll make as it relates to this particular issue is, again, to the extent this issue is before the fact finder, which we contend it is not, and that's one of the decisions you're going to have to look at, is that it is not something that is feasible to do in the current calendar year. It doesn't belong in the contract for the current calendar year. So that takes us to issues 2 and 4, which are professional learning communities and building leadership teams. These issues are not, don't carry with them some of the financial components that we've been talking about. These are more management issues versus issues that go into the contract language itself. We've laid this out in terms of what is defined. The district is currently in the process of studying, defining, and looking at the purpose of the PLCs through a strategic planning process. The purpose of the PLCs is for teachers in the same grade level or content area to collaborate in order to prepare and improve instructional practices. It gives them a chance to do those types of things. The current negotiated agreement makes no reference to PLCs. It's not in there. It's a management issue. We don't think it belongs in the negotiated agreement. We think that it is something that needs to be continued to be developed as part of the strategic planning for the district. It is something that needs to be continued to develop as a management issue. We think it's appropriate for PLCs to be teacher-directed in some cases and can make allowance for that. But in the event you have a PLC that's not high-functioning or has other problems, there has to be ability for management or administration to run and administer the process. And so we don't think that there should be a mandate in the negotiated agreement that specifies or requires any particular type of issue or control over that PLC. Same thing with building leadership teams. Again, we're taking a look at what the building leadership team's process is, what its appropriate level should be, and the leadership teams are responsible for leading through the school improvement process, including establishing, implementing, and monitoring the school improvement plan. It should be a consensus-building, decision-making operation, and it establishes operational guidelines. Again, the current PNA doesn't contain reference to the PLTs, and we don't think it belongs in the agreement any more than any other management-level decision or management-driven committee or process should be. We don't have any problem in discussing the PLCs or the BLTs. We don't have any problem in working with the teachers and trying to determine the best way to utilize those things, but we don't think it belongs in a restrictive process in the negotiated agreement. Student management was another issue that was brought up, and student management is again a right that is specific to management and administration as opposed to the teachers themselves. Administering student discipline is a statutory process. The students have statutory rights, and it is a complicated, often difficult process to navigate. One of the things, or one of the complaints that was brought up as part of the process is having teachers wanting access to know what occurred in every disciplinary referral that was made by them involving the student in their building. Currently, we're trying to work on updating the disciplinary code, which will go into effect. Again, addressing that disciplinary code and developing that is something that is a management issue. On Skyward now, teachers have the ability to enter disciplinary referrals for any student in their building. They have the ability to continue to view the disciplinary referrals for the student they've entered. They can view action comments. But frankly, a mandate that the administrator must provide notification, which is what the union's asking for, of what consequences are being assigned to any student for any behavior the teacher witnessed, could not only be problematic from the teacher's perspective and administration's perspective, but it could be volatile of the student's rights. And again, it's something that we don't think is appropriate to go into the negotiated agreement, particularly where administration is responsible and accountable for the student discipline under Kansas law. Staff meetings, this was an issue noticed up by the administration and it remains unresolved. The current language in the agreement limits staff meetings to being scheduled on Tuesdays for the time period of no more than 45 minutes. This scheduling constraint causes difficulty in offering professional learning opportunities for teachers, and we need more flexibility in when staff meetings could occur so we could allow the district to reach more educators and support content in a more timely fashion. In other words, if you're trying to bring in somebody to provide development or to provide issues, training and things of that nature, and you're limited to 45 minutes at a Tuesday, you can't have the same person be at Shawnee Mission South and Shawnee Mission East on the same Tuesday. And what the district has asked for is the ability to have greater flexibility in when those meetings can be scheduled. We've simply asked that we be allowed to schedule those on Tuesdays, Wednesdays, or Thursdays, and that the scheduling decision would be made by the building administrator with input from the building leadership team. That revision would allow and permit only one staff meeting per week at each building, so you're still going to only have one day a week where you're going to have a staff meeting. It just might not always be on a Tuesday. Some weeks it might be on a Wednesday, some weeks it might be on a Thursday. Late resignations, and this is the final issue that was noticed up and dealt with, it's still at issue. The current language of the agreement for the negotiated agreement says that resignations that are tendered after the statutory deadline will be accepted by the school district subject to a payment of liquidated damages in the sum of $1,000. So if a teacher, after agreeing to a contract for the current year, agreeing they're going to fill a position, tells the district in August or September or October, I'm no longer going to fulfill this teaching contract, they're allowed to get out of that contract by paying the sum of $1,000. When you lose a teacher after that period of time, it's disruptive to the school academically. It's difficult for the students involved, both emotionally and from an educational standpoint, and it's difficult from an administrative standpoint for the replacement to take place. In some instances, with like resignations, the district's forced to place a long-term sub in a class rather than replace them with a full-time certified teacher because they're simply not available that late into the school year. So it has negative consequences for the district and for the education provided for the kids in the school district. At the same time, the district recognizes that circumstances change and come up for teachers, and you can have situations where a teacher may have to move during the school year or have some other issue that comes up. And when those situations occur and arise, the $1,000, which at most is meant to be some sort of consequence or a deterrent for people to leave, is not really significant and only penalizes the teacher who maybe has to leave for some other reason or needs to leave for some other reason. The district doesn't believe that that's an appropriate way to go about it, and what the district wants to propose is rather than having a liquidated damage provision, we want a provision in there that says that the teacher will remain until a suitable replacement is found for at least a period of 30 days. And then after that 30-day period, they would be allowed to leave or depart without any cost or consequence. So, and there would be provisions that we had proposed that would have immediate separation in the event a teacher or spouse moved, a teacher was promoted, or there was need to care for self or family members as a result of illness or injury. So the proposal made by the union in connection with this was simply to increase the liquidated damage provision as an increased deterrent. We don't think that's the right approach. It doesn't accomplish what the district wants to accomplish, which is to keep qualified teachers in the classroom with the kids and give the district an opportunity to find appropriate replacements for those teachers who leave and depart. And we don't think the deterrent effect for those teachers who are in a position where they have to leave or need to leave, increasing that's going to have any real impact. So our proposal is to remove the liquidated provision and to replace it with a provision language as suggested. So those are the issues that are in front of you as noticed up by the parties and that remain in dispute for fact-finding at this impasse stage. The district's priorities for this fact-finding process are laid out in front of you. We prefer to reach a mutually agreeable resolution for this contract year. We want to increase teacher compensation. We don't want a deficit spend. We want to do it in a fiscally responsible manner, and we want to leave room in future budgets to be able to implement and sustain a long-term plan for increased planning, collaboration time, and to continue to increase compensation. We want to have money available down the road to address things like class size concerns, to meet district capital outlay infrastructure needs, to provide our teachers with the tools and the time frame they need to complete the objectives we've committed to as a community for our kids. We want to continue to be transparent about the district's financial resources and allocation of those resources. We want to make it clear what we're spending our money on and what's available to be spent, and clearly communicate and effectively educate all Shawnee Mission stakeholders about the district's finances and what our responsibilities are as stewards of those finances, and to provide for those in an appropriate manner that makes a sustainable program so that Shawnee Mission can continue to be a provider of quality educational services that's admired throughout the state, if not the country. So with that, we'll conclude our portion of the presentation, subject to any questions you might have.
Is that working?
I can hear you, Lee.
You can hear me fine anyway. That may be too close. Despite going through the different exhibits that the parties have pre-submitted, I understand that the BLT is quasi-statutory, at least it's mandated for accreditation standards. Correct. The PLC, it wasn't quite as clear. Where does that come from? Is that a preferred practice, or does that have some state board requirement like the BLT? I know they've been discussed in conjunction with each other, but they seem different.
They are different. They're different.
Different objectives.
They're different objectives, and they're different components.
But where does it come from? I guess and you don't even have to answer it now.
Yeah, I don't believe there's a statutory requirement for that as such.
And for the NEA,
yeah,
same.
I don't think there's a statutory requirement. I'm not aware of a statutory.
Just the materials.
I would say a best practice.
I think that's a fair statement. Yeah. I agree with that,
Okay.
but I don't think there's a statute.
Just want to make sure I wasn't missing something material.
I don't think there's a
Just more
statute.
clear on the BLT.
Yeah.
Okay, that's all I had. Oh, actually, does the PLC exist already?
Yes,
Okay.
yes.
And that wasn't clear whether they, I know you've been getting training, but they actually exist there. Okay.
Yes.
At different levels of functionality.
Okay, thank you.
I think that the parties had wanted to take a break, 5, 10 minutes. What do you guys want?
Cool it off a little.
Okay.
Yeah, it's a little warm in here. I don't know what time we're wanting to reconvene. I don't even,
15, maybe 6.
It is 6:12 now, so is 10 minutes enough, or do you need
Probably
more?
need
15, okay. So let's just say
6:30.
6:30.
sounds good.
6:30, we'll come back. Okay, we're going to get started again. Thank you for everybody's cooperation during the first phase here. And I turn it over to the NEA Shawnee Mission.
Okay, make sure everyone can hear us. Okay. Good evening. On behalf of the NEA Shawnee Mission bargaining team, I would like to thank the teachers and all certified staff, students, parents, and community members who have attended more meetings this fall, and those who have bravely stepped up to the podium to speak from the heart about the issues raised during this bargaining process that affect them both professionally and personally. Mr. Cox, we're not here to tell you what you can and cannot determine. We trust you will take into account the issues before you. And secondly, with all due respect, neither Dr. Fulton nor Mr. Goheen participated in the negotiations process. We're in the room. This has been a lengthy process that began March 29th when the district and the union exchanged notice letters. In our notice letter to the district, NEA Shawnee Mission offered 5 potential dates to meet to negotiate beginning in late April. The district rejected each of those dates because it was their intent to first present its proposed budget at the May 13th Board of Education meeting so the community would fully understand the financial outlook for the coming year. That move might be construed as preconditioning bargaining. During that budget presentation, a 1% salary increase for certified staff was noted. Let's be clear. That was prior to the Supreme Court's ruling on the adequacy of state funding and the legislature's action on additional money for schools. The district never offered more than a 1% increase, even after the court ruled. The legislature adopted a new finance formula, and Shawnee Mission received more than $9.7 million in additional funding from the state. Between May 20th and July 16th, both teams met 5 times. On July 16th, both sides agreed at the table that we were at impasse, yet the district refused to file for joint impasse, potentially delaying the mediation process. We met twice with the federal mediator, September 3rd and 27th. At the September 3rd meeting, NEA Shawnee Mission proposed a 3-year contract that significantly reduced our initial salary request and offered a plan for reducing secondary teaching assignments from 6 to 5 sections over the next 2 years. The board's team stated that they would take the proposal to the board for consideration. When we met later that month, the district's counterproposal maintained the 1% salary increase for the 2019-20 school year and it offered an additional $45 a month for health insurance premiums. For 2020-21, the district offered a 1.25% salary increase, as well as paying for the cost of any potential increase in health insurance premiums for that year. They made no counteroffer for moving secondary teachers from 6 to 5 sections or any other items previously discussed. And so, here we are at fact-finding. I would like to introduce NEA Shawnee Mission's team members in the order of presentation tonight. Jay Sharbut, West High School Industrial Technology teacher. Jill Johnson, North High School math teacher. Karen Myers, Neiman Elementary librarian. And unfortunately, Lindsay Atchison, who is a special education teacher at Arrowhead Day School, is ill and is not able to be here tonight. These teachers will be presenting information tonight as they have throughout the bargaining process.
Hello. That's functioning awesome. Oh, there we go. For my part, I will be talking about finances. You look here, the percentage of expense has decreased every year while the overall budget has increased. The total expense in all funds with bargaining unit salaries in 2017-18 was 54.56% of the budget. 2018-19, it was 53.66%. 19-20, it dropped to 52.07%. If the district were to maintain the spending level percentage allocated in the 2017-18 budget, the district would spend an additional $6.3 million on teachers' salary. That's a difference of $6.3 million. This is also the amount, it's actually less than the amount the district projected to move both high school and middle school teachers from 6 periods to 5 at $5.1 million. In 2014-15, NEA Shawnee Mission negotiated an increase to the base due to the fact that there was an early retirement incentive that resulted in 250 experienced teachers leaving the district. This also contributed to the change in the total percentage of the budget that is spent on teacher salaries. If you look at this salary history, it clearly goes against what you just heard about budget deficit spending and teachers increasing in pay. Shawnee Mission has always found value in leading the state as one of the top starting salaries in the state. This changed in the 2016-17 school year. 16-17, we dropped to 7th. 18-19, we dropped to 12th. Currently, we are 32nd in the state. We hear a lot about the averages of what teachers make. We have 634 dedicated career educators that have a salary over $65,000. Those teachers have dedicated their professional career to the students in this district. The district likes to include extra jobs, such as supplementals, when calculating total salary. Let's be honest, supplementals are second jobs, and they should not be included in the average teacher pay. They are also not available to every staff member. So that leaves us 1,404 staff members that make less than $65,000 a year. Here's a breakdown of that. That leads into, we believe the district has the ability to pay. budgeted prior to allocation of new money. All of this was budgeted before the district knew about new money. Shawnee Mission can always find a way for outside organizations to get an increase, but chooses not to give one to their own teachers every year. Yes, the district budgeted $500,000 for professional growth. But let's remember, typically the amount of money needed to cover professional growth is recaptured yearly. Recapture happens when experienced educators leave and the district replaces them with newer to the profession educators. Is this really an extra expense if it's recaptured? We got new money this year. The district's own estimates show that the state increased its allocation by $9.7 million. New money was intended to go into the classroom to reduce class sizes and increase teacher pay.
Hello, Kansas educators. Thanks for joining us today as we discuss a really important topic, school finance and its relationship to student success. We've assembled an outstanding panel that's going to talk to you today about the various ways they see spending money in Kansas to make sure we have outstanding student success. Let's introduce them right now.
I'm Mike Berblinger, Superintendent of Buehler USD 313, and I'm the President of Kansas Superintendents Association.
I'm Kathy Bush. I'm the chair of the Kansas State Board of Education.
Dale Dennis, State Department of Education.
Hi, I'm Shannon Kimball. I'm the incoming president of the Kansas Association of School Boards and a board member in Lawrence USD 497.
Thank you, panel, for introducing yourself. And now we're going to have a rich discussion about student success and the value of money, of how we're going to go about getting that done. Mike, why don't you get us started?
Well, first of all, I want to really thank the governor and the legislature for providing those additional resources. We know that education is a people person profession, and we know that the number one indicator to help young people in their classrooms is a high quality teacher. And so these additional resources have allowed us as superintendents to raise our base salaries and raise the resources that we can use in the classroom to raise student success. So it's just very important that we have those resources. We're competing in an economy where teachers are highly qualified, adaptable people, and they can be hired in many different professions. And so it's really important that we can provide them with the income that's needed. And many of these young teachers are coming out of college with student loan debt, and so it's really important that we can have a high quality salary for them so that we can attract them to our districts, and then it's going to be very important to retain them and keep them in the classroom and let them gain an experience. So we just really feel like it's important that we continue to climb nationally and compete with student success and with teacher salaries. So the additional resources is greatly appreciated, and we really want to focus that into the classroom.
Thanks, Mike. I really appreciate that discussion about leadership and superintendents. Spot on. And Shannon, I know that you'd like to talk a little bit about the school board's role in how they view student success and this money, and also how it affects the community.
Well, certainly I agree completely with Mike that we need high quality teachers in our classrooms, and the way to get them and keep them in our classrooms and to support our students and our goals around academic achievement is to work on the issue of teacher pay in our state. But it's supporting those teachers but it's also supporting our communities. You know, teacher salaries, they don't just help teachers, they help everybody in the community. It's a really important piece of economic development for our communities. Teachers spend their dollars in our communities, and it's important in a community like Lawrence. It's important in a community like Atwood, where I'm from. Those teachers need to be well supported so that we can make sure that we have strong schools. With the quality of education in our state being such a critical factor for economic development and growth, we just need to keep focusing on that. So I'm really encouraged by the opportunity right now that we have to start making up some lost ground from over these past many years on the issue of teacher pay. It's pretty simple. Great teachers equals great schools equals great communities. It's just simple math.
Thank you, Shannon. Appreciate your leadership in Lawrence and all the things that you're doing with leadership at Kansas Association of School Boards. Kathy, I know that the State Board of Ed has issued some pretty big challenges for school districts with the success of each child. Talk a little bit about the State Board's role and how they see school districts spending this money in the future.
You know, I'd like to echo what Mike said about thanking the legislature and the governor, and I also want to thank all the educators out there for their hard work and completing this last year and looking forward. And you know, the State Board really has, our vision is a very strong vision. We want to lead the world in the success of each student. And that's a lofty goal, but we think every student deserves that. And to do that, you have to have the best educators, and quality programs. These programs need to be research-based. That's an important component of what we do. So we really look at this as an opportunity. As Shannon mentioned, this is an opportunity to use this money to really support our educators, support our teachers in our classrooms, and support our programs. We want to look at how we can improve teachers. We want to look at quality staff. The number one thing is we've got to have great teachers in each classroom. We've got to have great leaders in the buildings. We need enhanced preschool education. Preschool education is so important, getting children started off right. We also want to look at, when we get up into our high school area, those focused CTE programs. What can we do to help our students toward that post-secondary success that is so critical? And the reality is we've got to meet the social and emotional needs of all of our children from pre-K through 12, supporting them so they can be successful in the classroom. You know, you look at Kansas education, what we've said is we're going to take a moonshot. Why? Because our children deserve it, our state deserves it, and these teachers and in our classrooms are key to what we do. They're key to our success. So the innovative and improved programs, I mean, if you want to look at it as a moonshot, there are spacecraft. Who's our astronauts? Our teachers. And what a difference they make to get us there and to have that success of each individual child.
Thank you, Kathy. Appreciate your leadership on the State Board and this important topic of school finance. Dale, but the bottom line is, do we have the money to really make this happen?
The legislature made a special effort this year to try to comply with the court order and provide us the resources necessary to meet the needs of students. But there's two areas they focused on. One was teacher salaries, and the second one was at-risk students. And for the first time, probably in the history of the state, we'll have a school finance plan we hope is approved by the court and is funded. Court signed off, the legislature signed off, and we're going up 6.5% in the general fund this year. Overall, there's minor exceptions due to enrollment, but overall 6.5%. And on top of that, we know the next 3 years, it's an additional 3% each year. This is just phenomenal. Great planning. And the teachers' salaries make up about 50% of the general fund. And I've talked to several groups about that, and they said, well, but we have to raise salaries for other people. Each line item in the general fund will go up 6.5%. And that has never happened in recent history, maybe ever, that we've had that golden opportunity. So this is really a special time that you can just look at the printouts. Whatever the 50% of the increase is, that's theoretically the proportionate share to fund teacher salaries. One other point I want to make, too, on that teacher salary bit is that we rank about 39th in the nation. There's no good reason we should be at 39th. We should be very close, at least to the median for the country. We're behind. It's a golden opportunity to catch up a little bit. And we can have committees, all kinds of things, but if we don't treat our people fairly, salary-wise, we're going to have a teacher shortage for the next few years. We've got to step up to the plate and take care of our teachers. They're crucial. And if we don't do that, I think our problem is coming down the road. In addition, on at-risk, they changed the law, and now it's called evidence-based at-risk programs. What are you getting for your money? There's going to be a post-audit, it's already started, on evidence-based at-risk. In other words, what that really means is the money you're spending on at-risk, are you getting any results? Is it something you can defend that meets that criteria? So that's extremely important. One more thing that's going to come down the road. There's going to be an audit on cash balances. That'll be next year, not this coming year, but the year after. And our cash balances have been going up in some areas substantially. And we need to look at that very carefully. I remember legislators, and one referred to it recently, said they are not bankers. And that's true. We are not. We're there to help kids. But the two focuses is at risk and bilingual, or at risk and teacher salaries. And this is a golden opportunity. And you know what you're going to get the next 3 years if the court approves it. And we believe they will. But there's other things we can get into, but we'll do that at budget workshop time.
Thank you, Dale, and everyone. Now it's about all of us collectively showing the leadership that's going to be needed in a different era, an era where the legislature and the governor have worked together to appropriate money for today, next year, and in the future for Kansas education. I know we can count on all of you to work together to make sure that student success is at the forefront.
This video was put out by KSDE and KASB jointly in response to the new money. Great teachers, great schools equal great communities. The governor, the legislator, KSDE, and KASB all say the new money should go to the teachers. 50% of this new money should go to the teachers. This new money is not to be saved. This information provided by the state about funding in this video doesn't quite match what you just heard from the district's team. Let's look at some of the others. Capital outlay funds. Operations and maintenance salaries can be moved out of the general fund to capital outlay funds. Moving funds would free up money for smaller class sizes and salaries. District's budgeting trends show a pattern to over budget and underspend the capital outlay fund. Bond money should be used to build new buildings, not capital outlay. Unencumbered balance. An unencumbered balance is a portion of an appropriation that has not yet been spent or tagged for use. Thus, it is the amount of money remaining that is available for use. Capital outlay and special education budget trends. Here's a few examples from the few recent years. 2013, capital outlay, amount budgeted, $33.5 million. Estimated ending, $5 million. Unencumbered ending, $13.2 million. Special education amount budgeted, $42.7 million. Estimated ending, $10.9 million. 8.9 unencumbered. That's a combined unencumbered ending of $22.2 million. 2015, capital unencumbered ending, $23.3 million. Special ed, 12.7. Combined, $36.1 million. 2017, unencumbered ending for capital, $27.7 million. Special education, $15.4 million. Combined, $43.1 million. 2019, 17.7 million, 13.1 million, 30.8 million unencumbered ending balance. If you look at 2013 through 2019, the average combined unencumbered ending balance for both capital outlay and special education is $32 million. If you take the unencumbered $30.8 million and add the contingency reserve fund, that's a functional reserve of $36.5 million. If you take the new money at $9.7 million and add the 9.5 from moving operations and maintenance from the general to capital, that's 9.5. That would equal 19.2 million. That could be used on teacher salaries. The money's there, and leaving that much money unencumbered will be noticed by the legislator. Next. Oh, yeah. Thank you.
Last spring, Megan Stiggy, teacher from Shawnee Mission Northwest, volunteered for Action Team 3 on the Strategic Planning Committee. She was earnestly excited at the opportunity to provide input that she hoped would create, that everyone hoped would create a climate to cultivate quality educators so they flourish in pursuit of our mission. The team crafted an action plan proposal that called for reducing the teacher load from 6 hours to 5 and called for reducing class sizes all around. Before being submitted, the team was told by district administration that if they wanted the best chance of their proposal to be accepted by the larger committee, they should phrase their proposals to include language along the lines of forming committees or investing the feasibility of. And Megan and the committee went along with it. They went along with what the district administration guiding the committee said, only to see that the language was being used against teachers in the district's legal brief before the fact finder. When she read the district response, she contacted NEA Shawnee Mission because she didn't have the opportunity to speak at the December board meeting. She wanted to set the record straight as a member of the committee. Again, she, as well as many others, felt that they were used. We are asking you, Mr. Cox, to consider this as you make your recommendation to both parties. Jill?
Thanks. So the discussion of the district's budget by Jay leads directly to the most important topic to secondary teachers. Hours and amounts of work, which is a mandatorily negotiable item, and it was noticed in our notice letter, we noticed hours and amounts of work, which would include the number of classes that you teach. As well, the district noticed in their letter Article 12 of our negotiated agreement, which also includes hours and amounts of work. This is what has one of the biggest impacts on student learning and the social and emotional health of all staff. As you can see from this chart, in the first column, both Olathe and Blue Valley have contractual language stating that teachers will have 5 teaching periods. 1 period is set by the building principal, and then 1 plan period. Shawnee Mission does not have this language. In fact, though, in Article 12 of our negotiated agreement, in Section A2, it does talk about middle school schedules, so it is in our negotiated agreement a section about middle school teachers teaching no more than 6 teaching periods. So this is what we're referring to when we would like to have language that limits the number of teaching periods to 5. If you look at the second column, you can see that both Olathe and Blue Valley have contract language stating that a teacher teaching 6 classes will receive a stipend. In Olathe, it's $1,000 per semester, and in Blue Valley, it is 10% of their base salary. Shawnee Mission does not have this language. You may have read in the KCUR article that was released today regarding fact-finding that the Shawnee Mission Communication Director, David Smith, pointed out that secondary teachers did get a pay increase when they agreed to teach an additional period per day. This is not true, and it's not stated in our negotiated agreement. Teachers did not receive a pay increase for teaching an additional period per day. In fact, most teachers weren't asked to teach a sixth class. They were told they had to teach a sixth class. With regards to plan time in the third column, you can see that both Olathe and Blue Valley have contract language providing daily plan time for all teachers. Shawnee Mission does not have this language. I know that in the district's presentation, they showed the section of our contract that talks about teachers having a plan time every day, but what they failed to see was that a few lines down in Article 12, Section D, 3D, it talks about block schedules. Every high school is on a block schedule. And because of that, you can see that the teachers will only have an 85 minutes of plan time every other day. So we are not guaranteed plan time every day at the high school level. And in fact, the majority of high school teachers on a Wednesday, which is an odd block day, will teach nonstop all day with only a 25-minute duty-free lunch. We sometimes refer to that as a no-pee day. So yeah. The expectation is that we keep our grades updated weekly. We plan, we prepare, we are ready for our students. And with this additional sixth class, the planning is increased. We cannot keep up with the needs of our students by having the sixth class. We are desperately in need of a change in our schedule. Most middle and high school teachers in Shawnee Mission work 20% more than teachers in Blue Valley and Olathe. That's okay. And when you teach 6 sections a day instead of 5, that means that over the course of 5 years, you're going to teach approximately 40,000 more minutes than those in other districts, which is equivalent to about an entire extra year. And that's just the actual time with your class. The time to plan, prep, provide feedback is just that much more. Because of this, teachers have had to sacrifice their personal time with their families to keep up with the workload of teaching 6 classes. This is why teachers are leaving Shawnee Mission to go to neighboring districts. The district has estimated the cost of teachers teaching 5 out of 7 classes at the secondary level. You can see that for high school, it will cost $3 million, and for middle school, it will cost $2.1 million. As Jay shared earlier, the percent of the district's budget spent on teacher salaries has decreased each year over the last 3 years. If the district were to maintain the spending level percentage allocated in the 2017-18 budget, the district would be spending an additional $6.3 million on teacher salaries. And this would more than cover the cost of moving secondary teachers from 6 classes to 5. The district has made the decision to budget a lower percentage of their total budget on teacher salaries. Our proposal on September 27th, we asked that by the next school year, 2021, all high school teachers be teaching 5 out of 7 classes, and those that were still teaching 6 would receive a compensation equal to 10% of their base salary. Additionally, we asked that in the following school year, 21-22, middle school teachers would be as well teaching 5 out of 7, and those that were still teaching 6 would get compensated 10% of their base salary. This is in the district's strategic plan. It is a goal of the district strategic plan. And Jay has just demonstrated that the district has the funds to accomplish this goal. You've heard from many teachers over the last couple of months in this Board of Education room that their workload, their hours and amounts of work that's a mandatorily negotiable item is increased. So much so that they're at the breaking point. We need to get back to teaching 5 out of 7 classes. And next is Karen.
So, do I have to use this? Okay, I have a really loud voice. Okay. So compensation is not the only issue that was brought to the table earlier this year, and it's not the only issue that we have yet to come to an agreement on. Building leadership teams were put in place in the schools since 2016, when the Kansas Education Systems Accreditation Plan for School Improvement came out. And there's a factoid sheet that talks about the building leadership team and how it should be working. And we like to point out number 2 and number 4, where, of course, building leadership teams are made up of employees of the building, and that for KISA, you just have to make sure that the team represents the building's employees. And that's our issue. Some of our buildings, the building leadership team does not represent the building's employees. The strategic plan mentions the, oh, sorry, thanks. The strategic plan mentions the building leadership, not the building leadership team in this one, but it mentions the importance of the building leadership groups, connecting with them, communicating with them, to achieve the mission. And as a matter of fact, the building leadership team will do a lot of the work of the strategic plan, as well the teachers. This is why we really feel that all the stakeholders need to have a say in who represents them on the building leadership team. We sent out a little survey to see how we were doing and if this was actually happening. And you can see that it's not consistent through the schools. The question was, how is membership for the building leadership team determined in your building? And based on our survey, you can see that we have 2 buildings that responded that it's voted on by the staff. We have 17 buildings that responded it was decided by the principal. We had 19 buildings mention other. Other would be staff volunteered and principal chose from the volunteers, or some schools, anybody's welcome on the building leadership team, any kind of combination of those things. Our concern is that the many schools we have, including 4 of our high schools, where the building leadership team is not chosen by the staff. So, we had a language proposal. The first part talks about what a team does. The second part talks about how they will function and the little rules they need to come up with. The thing that's most important to us here is the thing that's in red, and underline that each group represented on the BLT shall select its representatives on an annual basis. So, for example, first grade teachers would decide or vote or select which first grade teacher would be on their building leadership team. The specialists, the gym, library, music, art, would decide among themselves or select among themselves who would be on the leadership team, so that everybody feels like they have a say, they have a stake in what the building leadership team decides they're all going to do. We also feel like the building leadership team has evolved to be very busy, have important jobs to do as we implement the strategic plan, so I feel like they need to be a supplemental income. Okay, that leads us, I gotta click 2 things. That leads us to professional learning committees. Besides BLTs, the professional learning committees are an important part of a building's plan for the success of its students. And professional learning communities have been in buildings for the last couple years. I know that there was a big group of people sent to training on what PLCs look like and how they should work in the buildings, and then they were to come back and train the staff on what PLCs were and how they looked. We've been hearing quite a bit that not all PLCs are conducted in the way that we learned they were supposed to be conducted from the training. And as a matter of fact, it is often the third parties that are the reason that some of the PLCs don't function well. So again, to find out really what was going on, we asked some questions of building representatives. So the first question was, are the PLCs in your building teacher directed? Because that is what they learned at the training. Oh, thank you. You should just watch me and click it. So here's what the survey said. Yes, 36%. Sometimes 39%. No, 25%. That no is the thing that bothers us the most, that we have that many places where the PLCs are not run by the teachers who are actually going to implement what goes on in the PLC. The other question was, so then what we did was we asked the people that went to the actual training, the solution trees training, and asked them, okay, so you went to the training, you came back to your schools, you told them how this is supposed to work. Are they teacher directed like you were taught in the training they should be? And we've got 77% that say yes, and we still have about 23% that say no, that's not happening. So because the PLC is really important in our strategic plan, and it's mentioned 6 times in 4 different strategies, and because the teachers are the ones that are going to be implementing this, we feel that it's really important that the PLCs have some language in our contract so that as we evolve with this, as education evolves, we are ready to address issues. So this is the proposed language we gave the district. No, thank you. And so the first paragraph is already in our contract, and the red part talks about what a PLC is, and they should be teacher directed, and teachers in the PLC will decide what the agenda will be for that date. Another big issue is elementary PLCs, because elementary PLCs are supposed to be 20 minutes once a week during the teacher's plan time. The reason it's set as that is because if it goes over 20 minutes, then it cuts into the teacher's contractual 230 minutes of plan time of their own. So what's happening, though, is in a lot of PLCs, third parties are setting agendas, maybe doing a professional development rather than actual work that a PLC is supposed to do in terms of making common assessments, discussing how the kids are meeting the standards. My kids didn't do very well. What did you do with your kids? Those kinds of discussions. And so we would like it in the contract that the PLCs in elementary school will be at least 20 minutes, but determined by the team. So, for example, the teachers might need to work. We need to talk more about this. We need to continue for 10 more minutes, or after 20 minutes, they're done. And it's the teachers on the PLC team that should be determining that. Okay. Is it you now? Yeah. Oh, good. You click.
No problem. All right, so the district noticed staff meetings. Currently, staff meetings are held on Tuesdays, and the district noticed that they would like it to be more flexible so that staff meetings could be held on Tuesdays, Wednesdays, or Thursdays as determined by the building principal. So we looked into this, especially we looked into all the different activities, after-school activities that happen throughout the district. Currently, most things are not scheduled on Tuesdays because that day is reserved for our staff meetings. Many other things, though, are scheduled on Mondays, Wednesdays, Thursdays. As per the negotiated agreement, no meetings can be scheduled on Fridays, so that's why that is that way. On Mondays, for instance, and Wednesday, Thursday, we sometimes have vertical team meetings. In fact, the north area with Hawker Grove is going to have a vertical team meeting coming up here in a couple of weeks on a Wednesday. We have after-school clubs that meet on the days besides Tuesday. We have NEA meetings on Mondays, curriculum cadres, district-provided professional development, all these things happening on Monday, Wednesday, Thursday. And if our staff meetings across the district were no longer on the same day, it would be difficult for our staff to collaborate across districts, across the district, in order to have things like vertical team meetings or curriculum cadres. if Hawker Grove had their staff meeting on Wednesday and North had it on Tuesday, it would significantly limit what days we could get together in order to have a vertical team meeting. So after further reflection, based on all of our different committee schedules, after-school clubs, things like that, this schedule change would not allow teachers to participate in professional obligations outside of the building. NEA Shawnee Mission would not like to see such a change made. However, we do understand that there may come a time when Dr. Fulton or his representative would want to come to a building, maybe to introduce some kind of new professional development or have a meeting with the staff. And we understand that the building principal could, at that time, ask the staff, we'd like to have this meeting on Wednesday. That's when Dr. Fulton can come, or his representative, and have all the teachers change their schedule for that week to accommodate that meeting and have it on a Wednesday. We understand that we can be and will be flexible with things like that. But we do believe that we should have the same day across the district for staff meetings.
Okay. Yeah, you do that. Okay. I'm going to talk about student management. This is something near and dear to my heart. So, microphone? Okay. So, student management has been a high priority for our teachers for a long time. Issues with behavior, issues with getting help with behavior. And so, in March of 2017, when it really seemed to be at its peak, we notified the district that we wanted some language in the contract to address the issue. And the language is there in red. I'm not going to read that. The language was influenced by the existing language, the extensive language in the Wichita School District contract on student control. They have quite an extensive section in their contract on, they call it student control. So that year, the district was not interested in addressing the issue with contract language, but did propose instead to form a committee to look at the issue and try to get it resolved. And so we agreed with that. So we formed a committee. We first met in July of 2017, and there were about 20 members, half chosen by NEA Shawnee Mission teachers, and half chosen by the district, mostly principals, probably some other people thrown in there, I don't remember exactly. We all shared our concerns and talked about our view of the issue. It was a good discussion. And at the end, the plan was that the district would be letting the principals know that in August, they needed to make sure their staff knew the school-wide discipline plan and were able to put in the reports into Skyward. So school started, and we went along and met again in October of 2017. And while there had been improvements made, teachers were still reporting that some schools did not have a presentation on their school discipline plan, or did still have teachers that don't know how to put in discipline forms into Skyward. So that was disappointing, but we were encouraged that we were told that this training would continue, principals would still be pushed to make sure that this would happen. We met a third time, a smaller group, just myself and Linda Seek and some of the cabinet members, and again talked about how we didn't feel like it was moving along quite quickly enough, and we're assured that principals were being told to do this, being told to get that school-wide discipline plan in. Right? That was the last meeting we had. And so here we are, 2 years later, and behavior is still an issue. So we were trying to think about what we could do, what would be a small part of this that we could start with, rather than this big, long thing like Wichita has in their contract. So we decided that the most important part was to track the behaviors and have data so that we could help kids. So we sent out a survey in November asking 2 questions of teachers. We had 1,065 teachers respond. The first question was to them themselves. When you witness student behavior that requires documentation, do you personally enter the discipline referral into Skyward? And always, 45% of the teachers said, yeah, I always do that. 39% say, well, sometimes I do, and 16% said, no, I don't do that at all. And I want you to understand that we're not talking about small behaviors that can be taken care of with a shake of a head or a move of a seat. We're talking about major discipline issues. So that was the answer to that question. And the other one was, do you receive written notification from an administrator regarding assigned consequences? Well, the problem sometimes is if the administrator sees the child and there's a consequence, but the classroom teacher doesn't know what it is, the classroom teacher can't really help assist the kid or support the kid in that. And in high school, I'm not a high school teacher, but I know that if a child gets in trouble in first hour for something, and then again in third hour for something, there's no really way to track, oh, this is your second time, or this is your fourth time. Maybe the principal knows that, but the teachers can't see that. So anyway, we were asking for notification of that. And we've got always 21% people of the 1,000 teachers said, yeah, we always get that from our principal or admin, whoever it is. Sometimes was 50% and never was 29%. And again, we're concerned about that never. Now, I do know at the beginning of our committee, when we had our committee meetings, there's a lot of people that, or principals, that didn't know that they could automatically send that. There was a couple of guys on the team that did, and so part of that planning was to teach the principals on how to do that, how to get that email to zoom back to the teacher. So what we've decided for this year is that we've got to start somewhere to start getting our data right. So our proposal is that teachers will put the behavior into Skyward, and principals or administrators will document the consequences the kid gets and give that information to the teachers we put in a timely fashion. That's all we're asking for here. We need to be able to track kids' behavior so that we can see patterns, see where the problem is. Is it lunchtime? Is it library? Is it math? And we need to have those done consistently, and it's not done consistently. And sometimes it's the principal who wants to decide whether it goes in or not. And I know that this is all, the state requires this, but I know the state looks at these, and we want to make sure everything's in there and that we're very transparent in the behaviors we're seeing, because otherwise, how can we solve the problem? We want the kids to be more successful in school, so that's what we want. Mm-hmm.
The district brought an issue to the table regarding late resignations after the statutory accepted date in early June. We heard in the board's presentation tonight that there was an offer for proposal for there to be a 30-day wait period before teachers could be released from their contract. We did not have that discussion formally at the table. The district is concerned about, you do it, thank you. It's getting past bedtime. The district is concerned, and rightly so, when teachers leave during the school year. That does create a hardship for students, and it is difficult to find highly qualified teachers in the middle of the year to hire. During the negotiations process, the NEA Shawnee Mission team requested data that explained the need for this change. Are we having a mass exodus of teachers during the school year? And we were not provided that information. NEA Shawnee Mission believes current contract language should remain in place. We reviewed the HR agenda reports for the board meetings between June 2018 and December 2019. According to those HR reports, 15 certified staff members resigned or retired from the district between June 2018 and March 2019. And between July 23rd and December 20th, 2019, 11 certified staff members resigned or retired from the district. It should be noted that several of those resignations during that 18-month period were mutually agreed upon by both the employee who was leaving and the district. Additionally, some of these certified members might have been granted a waiver for the $1,000 liquidated damages fee as determined by the Board of Education. Say that last part. That's the Board of Education can waive the $1,000 liquidated damages, and they may have chosen to do so in some of these 26 cases. Liquidated damages in a contract. Let me back up. I'm the chairman of the Professional Practices Commission that reports to the State Board of Education, and we hear cases that involve licensure issues. We settled the issue in the last year when it came to teachers leaving their positions after the June statutory date, and determined that if according to statute, if there's a liquidated damage clause in a contract, then the district is bound to accept that and they must release them. If a contract does not have provisions for liquidated damages and an employee leaves, the employee can lose their license. They can be have their license suspended for the remainder of the contract year. Since we do not know as a team the reasons why so many people are choosing to leave, if so many is 26 out of 2,042, we think it's a pretty drastic measure to remove liquidated damages from our negotiated agreement without taking other steps to try and determine why people are leaving and to see if we can make changes so that people don't leave. And of course, there are reasons why people leave. A spouse gets promoted or takes their job, has a job that moves them out of the area, personal health of a family member. And so at this point, we chose not to entertain their offer or their proposal. So this completes our presentation as far as the issues that we have covered tonight. We began with Jay discussing the financial situation of the district, and we believe that we have shown that the district does have money to improve teacher salaries and to hire additional teachers. It's a choice in how they allocate money in their budget. We believe that with some planning, you can move teachers from 6 to 5. The building leadership team is going to be critical in decisions made in implementing the strategic plan. All that we are asking for is that teachers have a voice on that building leadership team and that their peers choose who's going to serve on that team. That is healthy in a district. If teachers, administrators at the building and the district level are working together for the implementation and eventual success of the strategic plan. Professional learning communities. I'm a big proponent of them. I've been to the training and I have seen the great work that can happen when teachers are allowed to use their professional expertise, their knowledge of how their students are performing in their class, and to collaborate together to help the students improve or to have their curriculum enriched. We're professionals. We want to lead our professional learning communities. Staff meetings. At first, we listened to the idea of changing these to different days, but we have a lot of teachers in this district who are committed to vertical teaming, to curriculum cadres, to working with people that are in our feeder patterns outside of the school day. We sponsor clubs. We're coaches. We're involved in our union. And it is beneficial for us to have a sacred day of the week that we assign to staff meetings so that we can plan our lives around that. We are willing as an organization to work with situations. Perhaps there is a dynamic speaker or presenter who can come and provide professional development to several buildings. If that comes up, we like to think we're collaborative. Why wouldn't we work with the district if it would benefit all? We also have a great system called WebEx. We use it in our professional learning communities. So there's a way to have professional development taking place in 2 sites. So we understand the reasoning why the district brought this proposal, but we think we can work together away from the table to resolve it. And finally, late resignations. We all want to work together. Part of the reasons why we have a negotiations process, so that we can work together so that our school district thrives and the employees that work here collaborate, work together, and people are happy in what they do. So we need to look at this issue as to why people are leaving mid-year. Professionally, that's something that no one wants to happen. It's not what's best for students. But to put someone's professional career at risk because whatever happened that year was so overwhelming, they chose to walk away from a job rather than stay. I think that's the rare exception and usually an extreme situation. And we should really be figuring out why it's happening to make sure it's not happening. And student behavior management, we're not asking to redefine how discipline is implemented in our schools. We are saying we want to be part of the solution. If kids are struggling in our class, if they are misbehaving, if there are behavior issues, we want to work with our administrators to help our students be successful in our classrooms. And in order to do that, if it comes to the situation where we have to write a child up, we need some help from the principal, then when that student re-enters our classroom, we want to be fully informed of the consequence that was implemented so that we can help that child start over, have a fresh start, and be successful. It's a team. We have to work together. And in order to work together to help a student be successful, we have to know what's going on. Thank you very much. We want to take a short break.
He said 15.
15. I have the microphone. We're going to take a 15-minute break and come back for rebuttal.
15.
15.
1-5.
It's always difficult in some respects going through and responding to information, but I think it's important that we make sure that we're looking at the same set of information, the same set of data, and to make sure that we have accurate information that's being considered and presented to the fact finder as we move forward in this process. The district's budget numbers, the monies that are available to the school district, those are public records. They're public documents. They're presented as part of the exhibits that you've received. They're available out there for anybody who wants to take a look at them to take a look at them. There was discussion about the district's finances, and one of the things we talked about at the very beginning of this is the district's budget is not something that's negotiable. It's not something in front of the fact finder to decide. But I do want to make sure that when we're talking about numbers and when we're talking about what is available and what's there, we know what we're talking about. We heard a video presentation, for example, by Dale Dennis and some other individuals talking about what monies are available, and I think Mr. Dennis indicated that there was, I don't know, 6% available in each of the funds accounts by the district. You got to understand that when Mr. Dennis is making that presentation, he's generalizing over the 300+ school districts in the state of Kansas. And that in fact, if you look at the district's numbers and you look at what the district actually received from the state, the actual dollars, if you want to do the math yourself, you can see the district didn't get 6% to each of those items in the budget. 6% refers to what the base aid or pupil monies was received from the state. You can see that actually, you might sit to the next slide. You can see on this slide that we gave here, and I can't remember which one it is in the presentation, that line number 1 is the base state aid per pupil, which is the sort of the cornerstone or the cement block that the state uses to determine what funding is or what funding monies are received from the state. And so if you look at that base number going from 2018 to 19 to 2019 to 20, that gives you a percentage number. That's not the total percentage increase that the school district gets. The actual number that Shawnee Mission received is the $9.6 million, and nobody's disagreeing with that number. That's the amount of money the district received in additional funds this year, okay? That's not 6%, it's 4.07%. It's a math problem. So whatever Dale Dennis said in his video doesn't have anything to do with Shawnee Mission's budget or what Shawnee Mission received. So that's point number 1 that I wanted to make, and just emphasize that you need to look not at what people are saying in the abstract or in general presentations or when they're trying to summarize funds in large numbers. You need to look at the actual data that we have presented that's available to the district, that's available to the public, that was approved as part of the budgetary process, that's approved as part of the state funding operations. The second suggestion that was made by the union in trying to suggest that there's somehow monies available beyond the $9.6 million. And we walked through, and I don't think I need to go back over it again, exactly how that money was spent or allocated by the district during the budgeting process and what monies are left available to fund an increase for the teachers this year and potentially next year, depending upon what the budget's going to be next year. And that's about your $3.9 million or whatever the exact number was that was allocated in the budget, okay? But the issue was, well, what about extra money that might be in the special ed fund? That was one thing that was brought up, right? Well, the special education fund is part of the operating fund for the school district. It's not separate and apart from the monies that you're seeing on the charts or the forms. So if you take a look at, so this one is the historical projected fund balance slide that we showed you earlier. And if you look at, this slide, the numbers that are reflected in this slide is the general operating fund for the school district, okay? The special education fund is included. It's one of the accounts in the special operations fund. So that's not money that's separate and aside, that's some additional that we can add into the equation. They're double counting it. It's money that's already in the account. Capital outlay, you heard some discussion about capital outlay. Well, just use the capital outlay. Well, the fact finder, you know as well as I do that the capital outlay funds are restricted funds by statute. Those are funds that are set aside to cover certain types of expenditures. They're set aside to cover buildings and grounds, repairs, those types of things. And they have restrictions on what they can be used for and how they are to be used and meted out. And they've been budgeted in that fashion. School district doesn't currently have a bond issue out there. So they have to fund and pay for all the expenses and repairs for their facilities and buildings out of that account. And that's a significant expense. They have well over $600 million worth of needs in terms of what those expenditures are. And those monies have been budgeted and allocated to cover those costs and repairs. And we talked about earlier when we were going through our presentation why it's so important to have monies available to cover and handle those expenses for the aging buildings and the aging infrastructure that we have within the school district, because we don't have a bond floating around out there. And if we want to go get a bond, we have to have proper reserves to get a proper rating from Moody's and the other organizations to be able to properly fund the bond if that were to be initiated and paid for. If you took monies from an account what's referred to as unencumbered. And unencumbered is no different than the fund balances. Those terms are sort of equivalent for purposes of discussion. So when you look at our sheet and you see things like the fund balances, well, those fund balances are essentially the same thing as the unencumbered balance that they're trying to refer to. And if you took those monies and spent them, it's a one-time expenditure. You can't take a one-time expenditure and fund a future ongoing obligation that requires you to pay year after year an increased amount for any kind of service or good. It just doesn't work. You run out of money. It's not prudent financial planning. It's not prudent financial responsibility. It's not part of the proper fiduciary responsibility that the district has to care for the district and its assets and its needs. The district, in our case, and you heard both the individuals that were presented from Randy Watkins and Dale Dennis and the others in the video presentation talk about 50% salary, use 50% of the money for teacher's salary, something along those lines. And I'll point you back to the district's proposal. The district's proposal, if you do the 2-year proposal, allocates 72% of all new money to teachers' salaries. Not 50%, 72%. So when you talk about properly allocating the money and spending it where we think it's important for the school district and to treat our resources and to value our staff, to suggest that we're not doing that is very inappropriate. There is a lot of discussion about what the proper amount of money to be used and utilized and what it can be used for. Those are budgetary decisions that are made by the district in August. The money that's available now and how that's allocated is what's left to try to determine for appropriate salary structure and salary schedule at this point in time, and that's what we're trying to do. And we've offered the money that we think we can offer effectively. We've offered the money that's available to do that will properly fund the schedule, not just for this year, but over the coming years, and not put the district in a financial constraint where they can't continue to fund raises and continue to attract and develop and pay for quality teachers over time. Those are important things. Now, we had, what's that additional slide? One of the things I wanted to point out, and this wasn't our initial slide, but it's a chart that I think is somewhat useful in that regard. When we look at the total percentage of money that's there and that's available, these are our 2 proposals again. So in the first year, we have new revenue that's available from the, if you take the general state aid plus the LOB, it's $8.6 million. And it shows that 63% of that is going toward teacher compensation, 85% if you look at the 2-year proposal. That's where the money's going. You look at new revenue, all sources, that's the 9.6. So if you do it beyond just the state aid and the local option budget, and you get all source of revenues in, the money goes up. 9.6 this year, over the 2-year period, 12.5 million. And again, 56% for teacher salaries, 78 over the 2-year proposal. I heard when the union was making their proposal that with planning, it's appropriate to make the right decisions, and that's what the district has been trying to do. We've been trying to focus on planning this stuff forward, looking not just at the current year, looking at what this effect is or impact is on the district over the coming years, and planning appropriately and making sure we're making decisions that we can support and sustain over time that are in the best interest of the district and its students overall. We talk about things other than just the salary proposal itself, and we move into things like the 6 classes versus 5 classes in terms of the teaching structure. You've got the exhibits in front of you. You can look at the statute. You can see whether that's been noticed up properly or not. I'll leave that decision to you ultimately. But I will say that when they talked about the block schedules and suggested that, well, wait a minute, we don't get guaranteed planning time every day at the high schools because the block schedule allows that to be done differently. There's not been one discussion in any of this process, in any of the submissions to you about the block schedule or changing that language or guaranteeing a certain amount of planning time during the block schedule on any given day. The discussion has not been about that. And so that's a complete red herring and not something that is really part of what the discussion has been in this case. The notion of these other items, some of these items such as the building leadership teams and the PLC teams and things like that, you can hear from the discussion what the debate's about. The debate's over control. The debate's over choice. We want to be able to dictate. These are management level decisions. These are important, appropriate things, important things for the district to do in terms of how they move forward. There's certainly been partnership with the teachers. There's been partnership with the community. There's been partnership with the buildings themselves, trying to create these programs and develop them in an appropriate manner. I heard the union say that a lot of the things that were brought up by the district could be handled outside the agreement. I agree. A lot of these things are things that should be handled outside the agreement. You don't need a contractual provision in your agreement dictating who gets to do certain things in order to be able to have an effective program or an effective committee. You have to have somebody leading the team. Not everybody can be a quarterback, to use a football analogy. You have to have somebody who's in charge, who makes decisions on what the components are and what that's going to look like, and is the final decision maker if there's conflict or indecision as it comes along. And that can happen. And have contractual provisions that are going to be vague or lead to further disagreement or not have controlling provisions in them is not an effective negotiated agreement. What that is that's an agreement that's headed for dispute down the road, and that's not something that we want to do. We think that's something that's important to do as part of the strategic plan. We think it's something that's important to do as part of how the district develops its process. We think it is a team. We think it is collaborative work, but it doesn't have to be contractually required in the negotiated agreement. When you talk about the staff meeting schedules, it's a prime example of why you don't want language in the contract that's going to be restrictive or prevent people from modifying things or having more flexibility in terms of how they operate. There's certainly a desire by the district to coordinate schedules and to make sure that teachers are available at staff meetings, to make sure teachers are available for different types of activities they may be involved in. But there's got to be some flexibility built into that. You can't have one item that's simply rigid and unmovable and have everything else be in flux or be able to be modified or optioned. And that's why we want the staff meeting. We're not asking for a lot in terms of that. We're just saying, give us the flexibility for building principals to schedule that on more than one day. And it would only be one day per week, but it at least gives us the option to schedule that out and to have that in place. Student management. I can't emphasize enough, and with no disrespect to Wichita, does not belong in a negotiated agreement. You're talking about the rights of students and how their rights are going to be affected or impacted, how their records are going to be received and reviewed, who's got access to the records under what circumstances. That's not a contractual negotiated issue that should be going on between the teachers union and the school district administration. That's something that's controlled by statute. Appropriate people have access to appropriate information, and the determination of what that is and the modifications or changes to that are going to impact the rights of students potentially. And that's not a path that should be gone down in the negotiated agreement where you have specific provisions that say, hey, you have to do this, teachers, and district, you have to do this, contained within the body of a negotiated contract that's got consequences such as breaches or other things that could come into play. You don't want your decisions driven about student data. You don't want your decisions driven about availability or access to student data. You certainly don't want decisions about student discipline driven by a contractual provision in a union contract. That's not where that belongs. That belongs in board policy, subject to whatever statutory regimen is in place. So as we talk about these different things, and we look to you as the fact finder to weigh the information that's been presented to you and to provide a recommendation, we want you to take a hard look at the actual information that's in front of you in terms of the data and the information. You can look at any of the source material that's been provided. You're available to review that. You're available to determine, using your own math, using your own calculator, whether we're accurate in terms of the information we provided. I submit that we will be, and you can do that. I think it's important to reflect that when you're looking at things like comparable to teacher's salary, We've relied on data from the Kansas State Department of Education. It's the only source that compares apples to apples as opposed to apples to oranges in terms of looking at it. We don't pick the information that goes to the state. The state asks us for that information, and they ask every school district for the same information. And that source has been provided to you as well. So you can take a look at those things and decide whether the information is being provided is correct or not. The bottom line here, and the biggest stumbling block to getting this thing through the impasse process and getting to an agreed contract with everybody, really comes down to the compensation piece. And as I said at the beginning, we've agreed to a lot of things. And a lot of those things we've agreed to cost money. And every item that's agreed to that costs money takes away from what's available to use for that final piece, that final component of salary, which is how much money are we going to add to the base in the different steps. The district's given a proposal that essentially pays all the money, all the new money down that's left in this first year down to like $300,000. So $3.9 million this year. And our proposal over the next year would be to continue to increase that amount. And as I said, that would end up being 72% of the new money coming from the state over the 2-year period would all go to teacher salaries. We think that's a fair proposal. We think that's an appropriate proposal. We think that keeps us competitive and rewards our teachers for the work that they do. So that's what we're trying to do here. We thank you much for your time and your work on this matter. If you have any questions, I'm happy to try to answer them or resolve them. But it needs to be a data-based decision based on the information that's been provided.
You still have sir rebuttal, but I was going to ask a couple of questions.
Absolutely.
In the interim. One of my questions is the tables or the charts that they have used showing the declining rank of Shawnee Mission School District teachers' salaries, where they're saying that we're down to 17, then 29 compared to the average data based on the school district that's in your exhibit. Do you have any explanation from your side how I'm supposed to look at the conflict between those two databases?
One, I don't know the source material of the chart put up by the union. But two, if I recall correctly, and I'd have to see the slides again because the only time I saw them was when they were up on the screen, I believe those are all starting salaries as opposed to average salary. And as we've talked about within the context of our discussion, the starting salary that we have is a very competitive starting salary. I think there's only one district in Johnson County that has a higher starting salary, and it's about a $400 difference. I think it's Spring Hill. And if you look at that component of it, we're competitive at the starting level. And if you look at over the course of a career, we very quickly outpace every other district in terms of career earnings. So I don't know the source of that. I haven't looked at every teaching contract in the state of Kansas to see what their starting salary is. I assume that the starting salary information, which is step 1, line 1 in the schedule, is probably accurate. But you know, from the perspective of this school district, and these have been negotiations over a long period of time, there's been an emphasis placed upon valuing teachers who are more veteran, valuing teachers who have greater educational experience, and that's why when you get to things like the master's level, other districts can't compete. And if you look at the schedules and start looking at that, you know, this district is regarded as the district that's the highest paying in the state. And I don't think there's any disagreement or dispute about that.
No, on the step schedule itself, when the district is proposing 1% for the first year, are you talking about a 1% increase for each cell in the step schedule?
Correct. Okay. Because when you do 1% to the base, it flows through all the cells.
Well, different schools, sometimes they limit it with different parameters, want to make sure it's for every cell that you're talking about with the 1%.
Correct.
You had mentioned the statutes on the student management, and I quickly looked back and I was wondering about that earlier. I didn't see any statutory references on student discipline issues, and could you provide
I can provide those to you. I could probably look them up while we're talking. But
well, just post-hearing, let me know and make sure you share it with NEA,
sure,
obviously,
sure.
And any statutes that NEA has
sure.
on that. The obvious issue there is to look at 722218L and try to figure out does it fit within a topic or not? That's
Right.
kind of the legal issue that I'm left with on it.
Sure.
Same thing on the BLT. My understanding is that's more regulatory versus statutory. In other words, the Department of Education has set out the accreditation standard that includes the BLT.
I think the term's been used in a variety of contexts, not just in the accreditation.
But I'm not talking about PLC, I'm talking about the BLT.
I think even the BLT. I think even the BLT predates the Keisha or whatever the acronym is in terms of a term. Now, it's been used in different fashions by different districts over time. So Keisha, when they did the accreditation stuff and made reference to it, I think they more formalized what the state at least means by that.
And I have what I think was called the factoid sheet from NEA, and I don't know if there's any regulation or other standard, or if it's just this factoid sheet that is the basis for it.
Yeah, we can provide that.
And if there is another reference, that would be great. It may be in the, almost said CFRs, the KARs, or something comparable to that.
I think it's less formalized than the KARs, but whatever's there, we can provide a citation to at least.
Okay. Those were my questions right off. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you.
One of the things you can do is we can kind of put those tables in a V. If you have specific questions, you just want to make another presentation.
So we're taking 5 minutes and then coming back for the SIR rebuttal.
And we all have to work tomorrow, so, and it's hot in here. We just have a few closing comments and responses, and we appreciate the time you've spent tonight and giving us the opportunity to not only present our initial comments, but also the opportunity for both sides to give a rebuttal. It is true that the budget was voted upon by the Board of Education in August, but it was publicly presented in the spring prior to negotiations ever starting. Capital outlay. If capital outlay is such a concern that something drastic might happen and those funds would be depleted, why are we spending money to build buildings out of capital outlay and not addressing real current concerns we have with aging infrastructure? Student discipline. It's currently in the administrative handbook. Supposedly, our principals were in-serviced in the fall on the importance of having teachers input in Skyward, discipline referrals, and then principals were shown how they could use Skyward to send a follow-up email informing teachers as to what consequence students experienced. There are all kinds of records that we have access to about our students. We know about their health records. We know specific health conditions that we have. We know of their academic history and academic successes and struggles. We know of academic accommodations that students are guaranteed to have. We're not looking to break state statute. We're trying to work collaboratively to be informed of how consequences are distributed to students, and then how we can build on that to help students be successful. Compensation is a major stumbling block when it comes to these negotiations, but it is not the only issue. Negotiations is more than salary. We bring issues of concern from the bargaining unit, issues that impact the working conditions and student learning conditions, and it is our hope that our employers hear our concerns and genuinely care about working collaboratively to resolve them at the table. PLCs and BLTs, they're not in the contract. A lot of things are in our agreement now that were not in there previously. Education evolves, it grows, it changes. We are confronted with issues now that we didn't conceive of 10, 20, 30, 40, 50 years ago. And we have to evolve and change to keep up with these issues. Ultimately, it comes down to choices, and that is true. The board has the opportunity to make choices about how they allocate the money they receive. There are choices that the board's team could have made in the past that would have had financial implications. The board chose at the time to accept a contract for a bus company that was not the low bid. It was $650,000 more than the low bid, and it guaranteed an increase of 3% for 3 years in times that were very uncertain, more uncertain than now. Recently, the board agreed for equity training for our district, an issue that is very dear to my heart. We have the potential of spending more than $300,000 over 3 years, contracted with Corwin, a fine organization. We created a new administrative position. NEA brought to the district an offer from our national organization, NEA, which would have provided this training at no cost to the district. These are choices. For negotiations to be successful, both sides have to be willing to move towards compromise. How we move forward after tonight's hearing and upon the receipt of Mr. Cox's report will undoubtedly determine if this district can keep pace with our counterparts in Johnson County, or if our shared history of excellence is just that, history. Thank you.
Okay, this concludes the public hearing. There's a couple of things I'm going to be huddling with both parties with for the post-hearing process and any submissions and that sort of thing. It's not to keep it secret from you. It's just logistics type stuff. Anyway, thank you, and you've been a very cooperative group, and I greatly, greatly appreciate that. I've seen a little bit more activity sometimes in the crowds, and given this large number, you should compliment yourselves and remind your students that, yes, I can do what I'm telling you to also. So, thank you very much.